Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And that video, I think, rather nicely sets the scene for a launch of this document, Policing for a Safer Australia, which the AFP, with help from a few other people, have been working on for quite a while now to show the shape of what Australia's future policing capability would look like. I must say I like the look of the copter bikes, Andrew. I think we probably need a few of those in the think tank world as well. My cats have already been chipped, and I see no reason why I shouldn't be in future if it helps me perform my job in a better way. It's great to welcome Andrew Colvin, who's going to speak to us this evening before a little bit of Q&A, which I will moderate. Andrew's a career police officer, having joined the AFP in 1990. He spent most of his early investigational career with the AFP's Sydney office, where he progressed through the ranks of the organisation, investigating a range of serious and organised crime offences, particularly narcotic importations, money laundering, politically motivated crime and terrorist financing. Between 2002 and 2005, Andrew coordinated the national and international aspects of the AFP's response to terrorism, including the 2002 Bali bombings, the 2003 Jakarta Marriott bombings, and the 2004 Australian Embassy bombing in Jakarta. This was followed by leadership opportunities as the AFP Chief of Staff, National Manager of the High-Tech Crime Operations, and several Deputy Commissioner roles. In 2003, Andrew was awarded the Order of Australia Medal for his contribution to the investigation of the Bali bombings and Australia's counter-terrorism frameworks. And in 2008, he was named in the Queen's Birthday Honours List and awarded the Australian Police Medal. Andrew has a Master's in Public Administration from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, attained in 2010, and was appointed the Australian Federal Police's 7th Commissioner in October 2014. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please welcome Andrew Colvin.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you everybody for coming along. I know it's Christmas and people have other things, and we're competing, of course, with Christmas drinks and all sorts of revelries, but I appreciate everybody coming out tonight, and thank you very much for those kind words. Can I start with a few comments? Firstly, can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Ngunnawal people, the elders past, present, and of course the elders and leaders that are emerging. Can I also say thank you very much to my colleagues in the AFP executive who've come out tonight. It's great to see you. I'm sure there's a few media out there in the audience. I look forward to your questions later on and very happy to do that. And can also say thank you to ASPI. Of course, as some of you will know, that I was scheduled to launched this paper a few weeks ago, but for a range of reasons, mostly coinciding with some events, some unfortunate and tragic events in Melbourne, we thought it was best not to, and I appreciate your flexibility to find another date for me. So it's an interesting time for me to stand here and talk a little bit about the future of the AFP, and we've seen a video, and I want a little motorbike helicopter just like that as well. It'll be a lot of fun, but there's a serious and hard edge to what's in that video to make us think about the future a little bit differently than we are. But we're doing that, of course, on the week that we're marking 100 years of Commonwealth policing, and in fact, Monday is the day that marks exactly 100 years since the first Commonwealth Police was stood up in 1917. Now, hopefully some of you are aware that over the last few weeks we've taken the opportunity to pause and to remember the events of November, particularly 1917, in the small rural town of Warwick in the Darling Downs of Queensland, that led to then Prime Minister Hughes to grow so incensed at what he saw as seditious behaviours that he moved immediately to create his own police force to enforce the laws of the Commonwealth as they were at the time. Now, we've spoken about that event a lot lately, so I'm not going to recount the story here, but to say that while it was a comical event, an egg thrown at a Prime Minister that knocks his hat off as he gets off a train, it was comical in hindsight, but we have to understand that it was set against a backdrop in Australia that was deep social divide. Deep social divide around conscription. The Prime Minister obviously was a strong advocate for conscription. The community was divided, but also deep social divide around our role in the war, the Great War. At that stage, we'd lost about 50,000 young men predominantly, and of course that was a huge loss to a fledgling country. Apart from celebrating a great milestone though, it has given us an opportunity to pause and reflect on what has constituted Commonwealth policing over that 100 years. I have to put my glasses on now. And any analysis of 100 years of Commonwealth policing leaves you with one consistent defining characteristic, and that is change. Not only has the AFB been preceded by no less than 12 different organisations and many, many commissioners, but our role and remit has always evolved to meet the political, the social, and even at times the economic conditions of our country. Almost every decade since 1917 has seen significant changes to what we do, and virtually all of the factors have been external to the organisation. In the immediate aftermath of creating the first Commonwealth Police in 1917, our focus was on reporting and the surveillance of subversive activities. Initially in Queensland, all the officers of the Commonwealth Police were sent to Queensland and to that incredible hotspot for seditious behaviour, Warwick. Funnily enough, the 1920s was about providing a policing service to the newly created national capital in Canberra, right here, and we still do that to this day. But it was also keeping the peace on Australia's waterfront. And at the time, it was the New South Wales Police who had rebelled against the Prime Minister and weren't clearing some of the blockages that were happening on the wharves and some of the protest activity. So the Commonwealth Police, known as the Peace Officer Guard at the time, was tasked to keep the wharves open because that was such an important economic reality for such a young country. In the lead up to and during World War II, the Commonwealth Police role was about providing security and policing of arms factories, the munition sites and other restricted locations around the country, which we still do to this day. In the 1950s, the Cold War period had its effect as our officers provided security and investigative services connected to nuclear testing in Australia and the associated investigations into, again, possible acts of subversion. The 1960s and 1970s, of course, had a social change theme all across the country, and it gave rise to public protests along with the emergence for the first time of organised crime and the beginnings of an international drug trade. So it saw us change focus once again. But by far the clearest example that many of us here will remember was the impact of the 1978 bombing of the Sydney Hilton Hotel, where history tells us that a bomb concealed in a curbside garbage being detonated, 2 council workers and a New South Wales police officer were killed outside a venue that was accommodating the Prime Ministers who gathered for the Commonwealth Heads of Government regional meeting. It was a significant event in Australia's history, but also a turning point for the AFP. So, of course, following a review of the national defence and policing arrangements in the wake of that bombing, the AFP came into being in October 1979, and it was a consolidation of what was then the Commonwealth Police, the Australian Capital Territory Police, and the Customs Narcotics Bureau. Now, as we roll forward 38 years, the AFP history has once again been dominated by changes in function, focus, and responsibility. But core amongst that 38 years has been national security as an enduring theme. Probably never more so than after September 11, 2001, when the world changed, as we all know, and the AFP was once again asked to make a new and quite significant contribution to keeping Australia safe. Now, our history has not been like most typical police forces. We have adapted and evolved to meet the ambiguous circumstances that have changed in form, and we have changed in form, structure and function many times in that 100 years. But this is the key point. We can no longer simply evolve. Events around us are changing quicker, we've just seen that, than ever before, and the pace of societal transformation is greater than our ability to simply rely on natural evolution to keep up. And while many of the true drivers of crime haven't changed since the earliest origins of policing, what has changed is the environment that we police. The cyber world has brought with it the challenge of encryption, the removal of geographical boundaries, and a pace of criminality that we never previously imagined. And we know now criminals have more reach to more potential victims with more anonymity and geographical protections than we could ever have imagined. The increase of terrorism has provided us with ideological motivations to comprehend, disparate offenders to identify, and devastating outcomes that are an absolute priority to prevent. It has taken the crime fighting that we do and that we know so well to a very public and an extremely global space. At the same time, crime fighting has become increasingly protracted and very complex. Foreign bribery investigations, as just one recent example, present a significant challenge to our resourcing, with an average age of just one investigation being 7 years. 7 years in duration. And that's not to mention the challenges that accompany international evidence collection for those matters, or the intricate criminal asset proceedings that often follow these investigations and last for many years after the investigation is concluded. In the shadow of a century of Commonwealth policing, these are all relatively new challenges for law enforcement. They are disruptive factors, and they're often led by disruptive technologies, as we've just seen. They are impacting the way we act, and they are impacting the environment that we police. But moreover, the change is exponential. Criminals who spend their time and money investing in technology, exploring our borderless landscape for vulnerabilities, and recruiting the very best minds that they can put their hands on, keep a close watch on how we in police respond. They've become the innovators, while we are the slow adopters. They are happy to see us keep doing this because it's good for their business. They can stay one step ahead. It helps them to succeed. And so we needed to lift the gaze of the AFP. We needed to challenge our thinking and reimagine who we are and who we are partnering with. The time is running out where we can simply allow change to be evolutionary. We need to try and get ahead of the game, and that is what we've done. Tonight, I'm very pleased to officially launch, and I see many of you have got it there, the publication Policing for a Safer Australia, a strategy for future capability. It's been developed to provide guiding principles for our necessary transformation. It doesn't attempt to predict future crime. To predict future crime would set us up to fail, but it does seek to comprehend the factors that will influence the AFP as we move forward. It does not intend to provide all the answers to the dynamic AFP we must become. It simply cannot. The science of prediction, as others will tell you, is not exact. So in this sense, what the strategy is not is almost as important as what the strategy is. It focuses on our capability, and it provides an assessment of what the AFP, its people, our processes, our technology must reflect if we are to provide maximum value to the community and the various stakeholders that we have. The AFP is a unique agency in the Australian law enforcement landscape, and the true breadth and depth of our operations and remit are not always widely understood. We have responsibility, of course, for local, national and international policing, making our span of operations both broad but increasingly very complex. In fact, the breadth of our responsibilities have often meant that to survive in a world where the demands on us are sometimes so high and resources constrained, we have built natural defences to our operation that to many have made us seem impenetrable. So in developing our future strategy, first we had to lower the walls to what I've called Fortress AFP and invite some new and alternative friends to the party. Some of them are here with us tonight. We looked to the people whose job it is to scan the horizon and predict future global environments. And it wasn't until we engaged with some of these forward-leading thought leaders, like those from Future Crunch, that we really started to get a handle on the things that we should be considering as we chart our course forward. We, of course, knew our business better than anyone else, but as much as that's been a strength for us, and it is a strength, it's also a weakness when it came to understanding how we might do things differently. It's difficult for police to admit that we don't know everything. After all, our society is based largely on a premise that we do. That's why we walk down the streets at night feeling safe, assuming that the police know what's going on. It's uncomfortable seeking feedback. It's uncomfortable hearing the truth. It can be uncomfortable realising the scope and the size of the challenges around the corner. And it's uncomfortable taking risks and betting on something a little bit less tangible than the sand under our feet. But in looking at what's probable, we soon became able to think about just what is possible. And this is when we started trying to break the mould. And because I'm time limited here tonight, I'm not going to go through every aspect of the paper. In fact, that's why it's on the table outside. I want you all to look at it and read it and make up your own minds. And while the findings may seem obvious to the casual observer, to an organisation draped in decades of tradition and customs, the simple process of imagining transformation has been a challenge. But the result is a framework around which we will define and develop the AFP of the future. Now, taking a critical look at our future has helped us to redefine that galvanising aspect that runs through all parts of the AFP. Remembering what I said before, we have a very disparate mandate at times. That's why we've redefined our vision to be policing for a safer Australia. That's what we do, regardless of where in the organisation you work, you are contributing to making Australia safer. And in doing so, we've also redefined our fundamental operating model and will now deliver against 4 strategic capabilities. Shifting our gaze from the equation based on the numbers of police we have, the traditional way we look at policing, and asking ourselves to focus on what we can actually achieve. So going forward, we will police along 4 strategic capability threads. Firstly, policing, where we protect life and property, prevent crime, detect and apprehend offenders, maintain order, and where we help those in the community in need of our assistance. Secondly, law enforcement, where we undertake criminal investigations and operational response elements focused on, amongst other things, organised crime and gangs, cybercrime, cyber safety, child protection, countering terrorism and violent extremism, and the recovery of the proceeds of crime. Thirdly, people and asset protection, providing protection services for senior politicians, visiting dignitaries and diplomats, witnesses, and sites of critical importance. And more recently, we've expanded that to look after our own sites and protect our own people in a way that we haven't had to do before. And finally, international engagement, where we provide international policing cooperation, liaison, stabilisation missions, capacity building, and policing assistance that is aligned to Australia's national interests. These are the core components of our future, and that will define us as we move forward. So if that's the what of our future, the key question, of course, for everybody is how. Well, there's a few things I want to touch on. We must place greater emphasis on technology if we are to stay in the game. Technological advances, when coupled with globalisation, have removed jurisdictional borders and have created fertile ground for criminal enterprise through, as I said before, increased anonymity and a much, much larger pool of victims. We need to conquer the fear and embrace technology as an enabler, not just as an impediment. We need to use the system to beat the system. And we need to look to people outside ourselves who already have some of the answers that we seek. We need to be more technically proficient and technically comfortable police. The men and women of the AFP need to be backed up by the very best tools and technical capabilities possible. In the future, the AFP should not just be known for our competence, our integrity, the success of our members, but it should be earmarked as one, if not the most, technically proficient law enforcement agency in Australia, and why not globally. To achieve that and to be able to manage the complexities of crime, the crime that we are encountering, we need to change up who we're also working with. We need to recruit differently and develop a more flexible, collaborative and multi-skilled workforce comprised, of course, of ethically driven individuals who are capable of critical thinking, capable of reflection, analysis and independent judgment. I have many of them now, but I need more. Lawyers, accountants, language specialists, engineers, cyber and digital natives, professional intelligence officers, the list could go on and on. As I said, I have many of them now and they do an amazing job, but I need to be getting more of them into the organisation. We need them to innovate and we need them to be dynamic. The police officer of the future will always still need those core policing tradecraft skills they have today. But as I said before, I want to know that when one of our police officers knocks on a door, a figurative door, in any context for any criminal investigation or any matter they're dealing with, they are confident that what stands behind them are all of the capabilities they need to deal with whatever is on the other side of that door. And that's where we need to get better. I cannot replace the skills of a police officer, nor would I ever want to. Policing is fundamental to our business, but I must supplement them with modern skills needed to deal with the complexity and the changing nature of what's going on around us. So the future of our workforce is clear. It will be multidisciplinary and it will revolve around our capabilities and our partnerships. The AFP will deliver the outcome, but we may not deliver each and every aspect. This will require fine-tuned collaboration with partner law enforcement agencies, but also with the private sector. We have to think differently about our traditional models of delivery. And this also leads us to redefining what success looks like to a modern law enforcement agency such as ours. Prosecutorial action will always be at the core of police work, and it will always remain the most effective way to disrupt crime. Prosecute, put someone behind bars, is going to be the most effective way to disrupt. But equally, we need to pivot more towards harm reduction strategies, disruption and prevention as core measures of our success. Now, we're already doing this in terrorism, and to a degree, we're starting to get better at doing it in cybercrime and cybersecurity more broadly. But we must become more comfortable with doing this across all of our crime types. Our aim must include efforts to do whatever we can to shut down criminality before it reaches our geographical borders or even our virtual borders. Now, there will always be more crime than a police agency can manage, so it makes sense that we focus our finite resources to the areas where they'll have the most impact. This may seem logical to, the casual observer, but it's a break with the traditional way that police think about tackling crime. Managing this demand will test traditional models of accepting and triaging referrals and forces us to ask ourselves some key questions about the impact of our efforts. Not just how many arrests can be made, or how many drugs we have seized, or how much cash we have taken. Did it fundamentally change the criminal environment? Did it make it harder for the next group to follow? Has it closed the vulnerability somewhere in the system that organised crime is exploiting? Can someone else deliver the same effect or better by us working with them? And while we're thinking about partnerships, one message from our partners, both inside and outside policing and law enforcement, has been clear. The ASPI occupies a unique and at times privileged place within the Australian policing and law enforcement context. Because we operate at that local, national and international level, we often have access to information, we have access to capabilities, even legislation that means we need to be prepared to step up and show national leadership. Now, it's important that I explain the way that we understand that and the way that we see it. This is not about the AFP taking the lead with each and every effort we make. No, we're always going to be in partnership with somebody else, and it's always going to be an equal partnership. But it's about recognising that at the national level, we are best placed sometimes to ensure that the combined efforts of all of our partners are pointed in the right direction at the right time for the right effect. At a minimum, we need to be that crucial interface between national security and domestic policing issues, because the line is now very blurred. That extends to the international environment as well. The AFP has always relied very heavily on our international relationships. We've had a long and enduring relationship with key partners all around the globe, and our reputation is really strong. But the future operating environment demands that we do more in this space, and we are. It's expensive fighting crime offshore, but it's also critical to our vision of policing for a safer Australia. Subtly, over the last few years, we've transitioned a lot of our international work away from those well-established liaison functions into a more proactive operational effort. Joint task forces across Southeast Asia on a range of crime types are pushing the limits of established conventions about international cooperation, and they're bringing far more operational delivery edge to our work offshore. Our partners appreciate the direction we have taken, and these combined efforts have been having remarkable results. Results that you're not always going to read about or hear us talking about, because we will always respect our hosts, but results that are very positive for all countries involved. So that's a little of where we're headed. That's a look at what the future has told us. To get there, we need to truly transform ourselves, and this is not just change as usual. While the phrase transformation is often overused, I mean it in its truest sense. We've set up a transformation program tasked with making our business better, and we'll come out the other side with a marked change in our form and in our nature to set ourselves up, hopefully, for the next 100 years. And more importantly, it will add a greater ability for us to keep Australians safe. So that's why, as we acknowledge the past 100 years of Commonwealth policing, we're also looking forward to the next century. Now, before I finish, and I'm very happy to take questions, I want to say a particular thank you to our partners for the patience you have shown. It has taken us a while to get to the point to launch, to the advice that you have given us, frank and fearless, and at times difficult for us to hear, and as we've worked our way through this future strategy. But I also want to thank you for the work you do with the AFP each and every day. It is an unarguable fact. The AFP does nothing alone. Some of our partners are government, others are the private sector, and amongst all of them is the community, who are our greatest partner and remain our greatest asset. So as we approach Christmas, I know that many in the AFP are very tired, and I'm pretty sure I speak for the executive when I say we're tired too. It takes energy to change. It takes resilience and courage to explore things that we can get better at. And our journey of culture and inclusion was the first frontier, and many of you will be very aware of what we're doing there. But it's been at the forefront of our transformation so far, but it's about to be joined by a whole heap of new areas. 2017 has been an incredible year for the AFP. We've had enormous operational success. We've worked hard and we've strived to improve continually. We've challenged the status quo, and we have not been content to rest on our achievements. Change is a constant, And if we stand still, you've seen in the video, if we stand still, everything will move past us. So with that in mind, 2018 is set to be a milestone year for the AFP. It's where the rubber will hit the road on our transformation, and it's where the cornerstones of the future AFP are going to be laid. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for hearing me out. Of course, you've got copies of it. It is also available on our website. If you go to afp.gov.au/futures, you'll find it. I encourage you to take a look at it. I encourage you to form your own views about where we're going. And before I finish, one final thing. Can I say thank you to Deputy Commissioner Ramsey Jabbour, who has led the work in developing this futures paper, tirelessly and tortuously at times, I'm sure. But Ramsey, to you and the team that you put around you to do it, thank you very much. Peter, happy to take some questions.
Well, Andrew, thanks so much for that. And having been through a few of these processes myself, I know how difficult it is to actually get to the stage where you can be at a launch and you've got your publication in front
Smaller
of you.
than a white paper, though.
Smaller than a white paper, which is perhaps not a bad thing. But you know, and I know, of course, though, that the real heart of organisational change is cultural change. And so I wanted to ask you, you know, what can you say or will you say to those young people who are moving into the police force now, as you were 27 years ago, maybe thinking to themselves that they might be Commissioner one day? What's the sort of case for cultural change that you can make to those youngsters?
So, I mean, the first thing I would say is, yes, you can be Commissioner one day, and that's important for people. I mean, you don't. It's funny, when I joined the organisation, I could not have thought of anything more distant than being Commissioner one day. In fact, headquarters in Canberra was a far-off planet that I really didn't care about. But that is so different to the recruits we bring in today. We hear it all the time. They are eager to be promoted. They want to be Commissioner, they want to be Commissioner tomorrow. And while that can be frustrating for some of my officers in the middle, you know, it's not a bad thing. We've got to embrace it. And a lot of that is about culture. We've got to understand that the culture of people coming through police forces now is different to the culture that I had. And I think we've embarked upon a large transformation around culture and inclusion. And I use those words quite deliberately. A lot of this is about inclusion. And I've said many times, and not everybody likes me saying it, I think, but culture will trump strategy every time. And I knew coming into the organisation that I wanted to make changes along the lines of what I've just talked about, but I couldn't do it until I thought I had the culture aligned. And I had a culture of people who want to change and a culture where people are prepared to explore. In policing, that's tough because we are traditionalists. We like to do things the way it worked the last time. And for an organisation of, you know, for a recruitment of 20-somethings coming in, they're not interested in how we did it last year, and they're not interested in the war stories of what worked. They're interested in how we're going to do it tomorrow, and they want to do it differently. And I would say to them, stick the course because things are changing.
Now, I will come to audience Q&A in a second, but I've, unlike many people here, I've had the benefit of being able to go through the report earlier, and a couple of points I thought were very interesting in terms of the description of the current and future environment. It says approximately 70% of Australia's serious and organised crime threats are based offshore or have offshore links, which I found quite a surprising figure. And then a sentence or two later, the report says organised crime costs Australia in the order of $36 billion annually. So this is not trivial by any stretch. And I can see why you've put such an emphasis in this and in your speech on those international linkages. Two questions. One, as you look at the international environment, is there a contemporary police force that you think is a model of the sort of change-adopting organisation that you want the AFP to be? Secondly, where do we need to do better in our own region or beyond in order to deliver this outcome?
So I'll answer three parts to that question, because what I didn't focus on, because it's in the paper, but others will have heard me say it, is I believe the impact of serious and organised crime in this country is far greater than what we understand in our normal consciousness and psyches. the figures there, $36 billion, 70% overseas, that's just what we know and can actually give academic rigour to. The figure may be much greater. We see the figure around what cybercrime costs the world, and it's measured in billions and billions of dollars. So yes, in terms of an agency that I look at, that I say that's where I want to be, I don't see one agency. And I think in many ways the AFP is leading the charge and trying to break the mould at the same time in terms of being that cutting global edge or global hard-edged organisation who wants to do things differently. But we pick and choose. I mean, there's things that our American counterparts do quite well, but they do it with numbers and they do it with money. We can't replicate that. There's aspects of some of our European colleagues in particular some of our Western European colleagues who are quite nimble. They're much more like us in terms of needing to do this within obvious constraints. The UK have changed their policing models significantly over the last 10 years. So we look at some of that as well. So I don't think there's any one agency that I want to replicate. I think in many ways I'd like the AFP to be seen as someone who's actually leading the charge and trying to think differently, and many of our partners think that already. What do we need to do differently? Well, that's tricky because we, of course, are constrained by international conventions, international norms, legislation that restricts what we can do. What police have proven themselves good at, and I think what the AFP is doing more and more of, is rather than looking at what constrains us, we're looking at what enables us. And our international network has increasingly taken a much more operational focus to our work offshore. As I said, it's not always well known, but it's vital that we do it. The idea of just being a liaison post transferring information doesn't work anymore. You've got to be collaborating. You've got to be working together. We have some partnerships with countries that would shock people in terms of the depth of our operational relationships, but it's important work. So I think it's about constantly trying to do things differently, not settling and saying, well, that's how we did it yesterday. It's got to be about trying to change it up. The criminals are changing all the time.
Andrew, thank you. Now, one thing I want to do is to give an opportunity for a couple of your individuals that worked with the AFP to say a few words, particularly in relation to the report's survey of future technologies which will be relevant to fighting crime. And so I want to ask Angus Hervey and Tane Hunter to, maybe guys, if you just come and stand on that side of the podium, we'll present ourselves as a sort of a police lineup, if that's the right term.
You know the future thinkers because they're not in suits.
So Angus and Tane are the co-founders of Future Crunch, which assisted the AFP. I'm going to take a wild stab, guys, and say you're not sworn police officers, so I think that's probably...
Maybe the beards that they're giving away.
Undercover, perhaps. So your work particularly looked at future technologies, and just to get the ball rolling on that, can you talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, data analytics and surveillance as being areas of technological development which will certainly be a strong part of the AFP's future? Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Tane. It's been a pleasure working with you. Oh, sure. So I'm Tane from Future Crunch. It's been a pleasure to work with the AFP. Thanks for having us. So simply put, artificial intelligence is the most powerful analytical tool that humanity has ever created. Because we're going through a transformation to turning the world into digital code, into zeros and ones, it's having a profound effect across every platform, every industry, and every country. So because we can map things like DNA, which I do for my cancer research job, to massive gravitational patterns across the universe into zeros and ones, bits and bytes, we can add intelligent algorithms to it to gain incredibly valuable insight. We all hear data is the new oil, but AI, artificial intelligence, is the best tool that we have to mine it, to gain value and insight from it. And many people think AI is this, thing out there in the ether, this intangible thing. But every time you pick up your phone, you Google something, you click on a Facebook link, you're engaging with artificial intelligence. So as the Commissioner was saying, technology, we really need to embrace it. Technology, which used to be a sector on its own, back office function, is now a layer across everything. So it's really important that we evaluate it. We see the opportunities and also the risks in it. And it's really important, in particular, that we engage with artificial intelligence because it is one of the most powerful, disruptive, and positive tools that humanity has ever created.
I think the other thing we would add there is this has been an incredibly rewarding experience to work with the police, because out of any organisation we've ever worked with, their appetite for change and their willingness to embrace and research these technologies is almost unparalleled. And there's a simple reason for that. You'd think a conservative organisation like the police would be resistant to change, but for them, all of these technologies and all these disruptions are not issues that are happening in the future. These are coalface issues that they are facing right now. So for them, it's not a matter of innovation, it's a matter of do or die. And we know that the AFP, based off the back of this work, has now actively researching artificial intelligence algorithms. They're doing research into genetics, they're doing research into cryptocurrency. They are using these tools in their operational day-to-day sort of reality. And as the AFP goes down this road, it's going to become the leading police organization in the world and the go-to people to really, for other police organizations to come to say, what is going to be the impact of disruptive technologies on policing in the 21st century?
Guys, would you say, is AI the most disruptive technology, or are there others that you would nominate that we've got to pay attention to?
Just for fun, we'd probably disagree about this. You know, I use machine learning and AI in my job almost every day to read the code of life, DNA, but definitely blockchain is very close behind. So cryptocurrencies, now we're hearing all about it. It's just exploding around the world. And that's another technology that we need to pay attention to, because criminals go to where the value is. And right now, cryptocurrency is often quite hidden. You can exchange value anonymously. So it's really important that the AFP and many police organizations and the government get involved and deal with regulation and, yeah, how to police these new types of technologies.
Yeah. I would say it's not one individual technology. It's this confluence of genetics, blockchain, robotics, artificial intelligence, drone technologies, connectivity, cryptocurrency, brain-machine interfacing. They're all hitting at once, and each of those on its own would be a once-in-a-100-year revolution. They are now hitting all at the same time. And so the police really got this, I think, in this research, and increasingly we're going to see that start happening in other sectors as well.
And you didn't even mention helicopter bikes.
And,
ladies and gents, can you thank Angus and Tony?
Thank you very much.
Well, now over to you for some questions and comments from the audience. We've got a roving mic here, so once I've identified you, if you can wait for the mic as well. And we'll go to Stephen Leslie, and then we'll come to you afterwards.
Thanks, Andrew. In your op-ed in the Australian today, in the strategy document and in your remarks, you were referring on a number of occasions to the globalisation of crime. Now, you've been very successful in building up the AFP's international network. How do you manage issues where we take leaps forward with the AFP technologically, but some of our partnering organisations, and perhaps Interpol is even included in this, don't really come up to the mark that we're seeking to achieve? How do you manage that relationship, or those series of relationships for the future, in terms of liaison and effective policing?
Thanks, Stephen. And we actually have a representative from Interpol here, so interestingly. Who I must say are here because they are exploring how we should be doing things differently themselves. Look, I think there's a reality in policing around the world that we are always going to be progressing at different stages, and that's always happened through our history as well. What we're seeing with technology, I think, is that it's just making that more exponential, and it's highlighting the gaps even more. So within our region, of course, you know, we sit at the base of Southeast Asia, and we sit on the edge of the Pacific, and we straddle both. And we sit in the Asia-Pacific region, where you've got the world's biggest economies, fastest growing economies, and you've got the world's absolute smallest economies, where there's a lack of governance and where there's ungoverned territories, frankly. So we're used to trying to work between all of that. Yes, we will choose to partner sometimes on specific issues with countries or organisations, agencies that have like-minded and similar capabilities, but we're not doing our job if we only want to work with the countries that think like us or the countries that can do things like us. A lot of our effort in the region is around trying to lift the capability of everybody to a similar standard, because again, we're only, as a global community, we're only as strong as the weakest governed territory, and we're seeing that play out in real time in parts of the world not far from us.
There was a gentleman in the third row.
Hi. I was just curious to know, what is the key policy reform that you would like to see to be implemented in Australia for us to engage with our foreign counterparts better?
I think that there's probably a number of things, a number of ways I can answer. I want to be careful because, of course, I don't want to stray too much into policy discussions. But what is clear is that our international mechanisms for sharing intelligence, for sharing information, for passing evidence have fallen well behind technology, have fallen well behind global standards of trade, have fallen well behind the way business operates. So I'm talking about things like Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, international evidence collection. They will always be a logical constraint on what we do, and I think this is the area that we need to put a bit more focus. Now, I say that knowing that Australia can change whatever laws it wants to, unless the laws in the other countries are changed at the same time. So unless there's a global effort to think about this differently, we're going to struggle. As we see more and more information held in companies that are well out of the reach of normal jurisdictions, we need to work as a global community to work out how can we make this faster, how can we make it easier, how can we access that information. At the moment, we are applying, in all reality, 80s, at best 90s level legislation to what is a 2020, 2030 problem. So we need to think about that.
I'm getting the impression we're going to need more AFP posted overseas, though.
I would love to put more AFP overseas. I think in terms of return on investment, the work we do overseas returns an incredible dividend for the community. As I said, you won't always see it, you won't always know what we're doing overseas, and I'm comfortable with that. But we have, for many years now, taken a strategy of pushing our borders as far out from the country as we possibly can. Now, we have a geographical advantage in Australia. We have no partnered land border. It's good and it's bad. We've got a lot of, as Mike will know, and as Secretary Designate for Home Affairs, there's a lot of land and a lot of coastline that we have to try and protect, and it's very difficult. But it's also difficult to get here. So more and more, though, we are pushing our border out as far as we can and helping our communities in neighbouring countries improve their capabilities, because that protects us. The more people I can put overseas, the better.
That was a key finding of the 2016 Defence White Paper, which was that it's to advance national interests, you need to get more people overseas in sort of diplomatic roles, but really doing professional roles that the Defence Department recognises.
Our officers overseas, they do a remarkable job of transitioning, being a diplomat sometimes, being a liaison officer, and being an operational police officer, and they do all three of them very well.
Some more questions for the Commissioner. Yes, please.
Thanks, Commissioner. I was just wondering, when we're looking in the cyber centre at the rates of cybercrime around the world, there seems to be, even as we're increasing cybersecurity, we're getting increased rates of cybercrime. I was just wondering whether you're starting to see an appetite amongst international counterparts that maybe there's a need to have a much greater emphasis on law enforcement internationally and cooperation in that space, if that's part of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in the cybercrime world, it is human frailties and human nature combined with increased technologies mean that people are going to be scammed, people are going to make mistakes online, and they're going to lose their cash. And the volume of that crime now, it is the most voluminous crime that law enforcement has. There's no question about that. And that's global. So for a long time now, we've been working with our partners, particularly more of our like-minded partners when you think about capabilities, on how we can do this better. And there's international norms, there's Budapest conventions, there's things like that that say how we should operate in this space. But we're not getting the traction that we probably need. And that's because, coming back to what I said before about frameworks designed in the 80s and 90s, or 70s in some cases, aren't keeping pace with the cyber world of today. So there's a huge appetite and willingness from law enforcement agencies, both who have the capabilities now and are like-minded, as well as those that are trying to develop, to do more. And there's plenty of opportunities for us to do that.
Now, let's go over to here.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for inviting Interpol to be attending this And I'm somewhat shocked by the remark of, however, I probably have not the right interpretation, but let me first congratulate you with this new vision. However, when I came and entered the room, I was a little bit shocked as a representative of Interpol, policing for safer Australia. Where is the world? And I'm very pleased after this discussion that most of you actually mentioned, after your excellent presentation, the relevance of international cooperation. However, some people are not satisfied with the role of Interpol. Let me underline that Interpol is us. It's what we, as 192 member states, put into it. What you put into it, you also get out of it. I will leave it with that. But what I'm very curious about, Commissioner, is if we talk about all the challenges and all the changes, how does your perspective and your vision, does a new vision on a global police architecture look? What kind of essential elements should be part of that vision?
Thanks, Anita. I guess a couple of things. Yes, we're saying policing for a safer Australia, because that's ultimately what I'm paid to do, and that's what the organisation is asked to do. But implicit in that is my international relationships and my international efforts, because I cannot keep Australia safe without doing more internationally and working with our partners. If I look forward, how do I see international policing in the future? It doesn't look like the AFP working with our partners in a transactional sense. It looks far more like multidisciplined, probably not even organisations, countries working together. It looks far more like international bodies, be it Interpol or be it the United Nations or be it whatever you can imagine, providing the frameworks and facilitating the legislation for us to work more cooperatively together. At the moment, we're still tied to traditional paradigms of individual agencies working in partnership. I don't know what's going to crack that. The disruptive factors are already there telling us we have to change it, but you know, I am still constrained in what I can do in any other country other than Australia, and I'm constrained to the goodwill of the country that invites me in, and I'm constrained to the ability of my officers to convince, cajole, influence what happens. I don't see that changing anytime soon, but I think there's little glimpses into the future. Glimpses such as, you know, at a really local level, the work that's been done in the Solomon Islands, where international police from all across the Pacific came into a country, policed in that country under that country's laws, and made the country safer so that when the international police left, they could do it themselves. I think that's a glimpse into probably where the future lies.
We've got time for maybe one or two more quick questions. Anthony.
Anthony Bergen from ASPI. You've set out the national and international challenges, and Peter cited that figure that the vast majority of organised crime comes offshore. So I suppose my question is, how does your local policing role fit in with all that? I mean, is it a bit of a distraction, the fact that you're having to provide the policing for the ACT, or is that part of the bigger picture or not?
Look, it's not a distraction, and the CPO of the ACT Police is here, so I'll be very careful what I say, Juz. No, look, it's not, and it's not for one very simple way, and I said it in the speech. I will always need core policing skills to do the job I do. So it doesn't matter where in the world I find myself or the complexity of the work I do, I need core policing skills. And I'm going to get those best through some of my community policing operations here in the ACT, at airports around the country. Does it make it an interesting mix for an organisation who, on one level, I'm doing very core community policing roles right through to some of the most complex, protracted cases, all in the same organisation, all effectively coming through the same training paradigms, all effectively using the same information and the same capabilities, yes, but that's why we want to change our capabilities. So we're very specific about those 4 capabilities we're going to police along, and one of them is around policing in its traditional sense. In the AFP and in organisations like us, and there's not many in the world, but organisations like the RCMP or the Dutch police, for instance, you know, there are other agencies that have to transition between the 3 different levels of policing. But I think what we have found over time is that it provides us with an opportunity to give our officers a broad array of careers in one, which is an advantage in an era when people see something like policing more as a vocation than a career these days. So they move in and out of things. The beauty of the organisation is I can offer you, 50, 60 different careers in one organisation. It provides challenges for me, but it's important. It's very important. So no, I wouldn't want to see that change. And it doesn't put extra strain on the organisation as some think it does, because I'm funded by the ACT government for what I provide to the ACT government. So it's a contract arrangement effectively, and it's user pays.
Andrew, we've been performing here under the laser-like gaze of Mike Pizzullo, very shortly to be Secretary of Home Affairs, barring accidents in the next 48 hours.
48 hours?
I'm not suggesting anything is going to happen, but of course that does point out that we're going to be seeing, as the government has called it, the most significant restructure of internal security, probably in several generations actually, over really starting now and going over 2018.
Yep.
How does this gel with the concepts that you're advancing in the document here? Because really now you've got 2 quite big cultural change exercises to implement.
So a couple of things. Firstly, everything I've just talked about is about us. And I could take a perspective that it doesn't matter where I sit within government, it doesn't matter what my funding is, I need to do what I've just talked about to ensure the survival of my agency and to make sure that we're on a trajectory that sees me around in 100 years, for instance. We need to make these changes. So we'll make them regardless of the broader construct that we sit in. But the move to Home Affairs is logical for a range of reasons. One, first and foremost in my mind, is that everything I've just talked about tonight and everything I've said in other speeches this year in particular should leave people with the view that the AFP is at the centre of our national security. And I don't say national security in a domestic sense or an international sense, it's all one. And the idea that we will now have a cabinet minister representing our interests, I think is fantastic. And we haven't had that in the AFP since the early 1980s. And I think Commonwealth policing has changed so fundamentally in the last 20 years in particular, that's a good thing. The other thing is it brings an economy of scale. And I think we shouldn't, in an era where you talk to our Future Crunch colleagues, research and development in this space requires an economy of scale. Delivering technologies requires an economy of scale. So I think that the Home Affairs portfolio provides us an opportunity to deliver on that economies of scale and make sure that we are picking the very best technologies we can, and we are using them in the very best ways we can across all of our agencies. And then from a community perspective, frankly, if I'm Andrew Colvin sitting in central Queensland somewhere, I just expect that this is being done anyway. I don't expect that there's any divisions between my agencies or there's any unintended rivalries. I expect that they're all working together and that the government is aligning them properly, and that's what we're doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please thank Andrew Colvin?
Thank you.
Well, Andrew, I want to thank you for that tremendous presentation, for gifting to ASPI the opportunity to release this document. I can say that as an organisation, we've enjoyed working with you and your colleagues over quite a while now to make a small contribution to this process. And this is your second speech with us in a fairly short space of time. So thank you for that support. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got a very thoughtful document here which does a very difficult thing, which is to grapple with future challenges and then work out how you can backcast from that to redesign your organisation to meet those challenges. And I think that what Andrew has done is shown us the sense of which there is a big challenge ahead of the Federal Police and the broader national security community to make sure that they are absolutely fit for purpose in dealing with an environment where speed is increasing, where our enemies are able to make use of the same technologies that we have access to, but often faster and clearly without regard for decency or the law in terms of how they can employ these things. So I think all strength to Andrew, all strength to the Australian Federal Police as they go through what I think is going to be quite a serious transformative journey over the next few years. Can I ask you once again to thank the Commissioner?